would be the board's role in determining an annual calendar, and how might it help influence and affect the work of the board? In this video, we explore the visible academic calendar, the tip of the iceberg, and the larger mass under the water, which is the board's annual calendar. When trustees think of the annual calendar, typically the initial thought are those academic dates covering the terms or semesters and holiday periods. While this is probably a role that does require formal board approval, these dates may well be mandated by local government or have external commitments that would be immovable, such as dates for IB exams or A-level or GCSE exams. Typically, the leadership or administration drafts a couple of alternative versions of the school's calendar, showing any fixed dates, such as public holidays, that have to be considered, and those external factors, such as examination timings, for IB or GCSE, or maybe other schools if there are fixtures that have to be borne in mind. If the term dates are not mandated by the state, there'll be some flexibility in how the teaching days can be distributed, which may help spread the pressure points, but equally could add to them. There's no fixed number of contact days in a school, although typically international schools may be somewhere around 180 days. Some curriculum and examination boards provide guidelines on the minimum number of contact hours for courses, which in turn influences the school year, but equally there are online schools and project-based learning schools that take a very different approach. The distribution of non-teaching days or holidays is important, as the process of learning for the students is tiring, and they do need to have breaks. But then the long holidays tend to lead to students going off the boil a bit. The locally mandated public holidays obviously provide a framework, but there may also be significant segments of the parent community that have their own wishes too. So for example, Australian or South African families would see the time around Christmas in December as being their preferred long holiday, whereas European and American families would opt for a Northern Hemisphere summer, that's July time, for being the long holiday. British-styled international schools traditionally run from September through to July, whereas IB schools are usually synchronized a month earlier, from August to June, while some Southern Hemisphere schools follow a January to December calendar. You'd need to start planning the calendar probably a year in advance, so that it can be approved by the board and published at least 6 months before the start of the new academic year. So aside from the academic calendar, there are the board and administrative annual calendars that are very helpful in identifying pressure points and big chunks that need to be done during the year. Identifying these reoccurring and important tasks takes time, of course, but it's time well spent. So for example, if you know that the Finance Committee have to monitor the income and expenditure accounts throughout the year, but also has to prepare the budget for the following year, before the budget can be presented to the board for approval, you'd have to have factored in any variations in the school fees, made realistic projections for student numbers, have staffing levels, agreed any staff salary increases, factored in any capital development, and reviewed current and historical levels of spending to identify if the budget allocations are realistic, especially considering any additional changes that have to be planned. That's a lot of data to collate and analyze, and various factors that may require input from other board committees. So for example, you may have a policy committee that's approved a change to the language policy in the school, and the implication of that may be an additional half a teacher in the secondary section, and a new set of textbooks. The planned bathroom renovations need to be costed and factored in, and what about impact of COVID-19 and additional wash basins or disinfectant stations? All of these things have to be considered. The school leadership and perhaps an HR or personnel committee would be looking at overall staffing levels, and maybe they've recommended a 3% pay increase across the board, but that needs to be approved by the board before December, which is when the contracts will be issued. If the decision is delayed beyond December, there's a risk that there may be some staff that have been thinking about leaving who now make that mental shift to say, I'm going, while the recruitment of new teachers hinges on having up-to-date contracts. Suddenly the work of the board is not only getting very full, it needs to be tackled in the correct order to avoid chaos. And this is of course where the annual calendar comes in. By identifying these internal deadlines, you can start to work backwards to see where this work needs to start. And you can also highlight where the input from maybe the school's leadership or administration or other board committees or focus groups, where that's required in order to make decisions. Superimposed on these tasks might be the board's own identified goals for the year, as well as a timescale for self-reflection and review. While there will always be additional and unforeseen situations that arise during the year that need board attention, this annual calendar helps keep focused on these identified priorities. And if they start slipping, it'll be no surprise that that will lead to either disorganized decisions or no action at all. Where the board committees have been able to identify specific targets for the year, these can be brought into the committee's terms of reference, and again as a clear, concise reminder of the responsibilities and expectations for the work that needs to be covered by the board. Everyone is then clear about what needs to be done within each committee, and highlights and timescales have been identified. As I said, this can really help galvanize boards, but perhaps more importantly, to give you the courage to focus on the really important strategic decisions and discussions when there's the pressure to deal with urgent, more petty perhaps, decisions and discussions. I know this can sound a bit hypothetical, but with a school in which parents and teachers are emotionally invested, not just financially, there can be constant undercurrents and uprisings that can be difficult to understand where the political motivation may be coming from. But nevertheless, they can suck the life out of you as a trustee, and you're left lurching from one crisis to the next. Having the annual calendar helps bring focus to the work of the board that you've identified as being essential. And so regardless of whatever issues or conversations or complaints or whatever it is that arise, you still know what needs to be done and you can keep a focus on that. You have to find a way to deal with it. So in this way, you may need to delegate some of the issues to committees, whether it be a standing committee or an ad hoc committee on communication or whatever, so that the work of the finance and policy committees can continue without the stress and distraction. Remember, leadership takes courage. Courage to do the right things for the right reasons, not the quick win, not the quick fix solutions. Having your mission statement and values as a touchstone for all decisions is powerful, and your annual calendar serves as a steady reminder of how you need to pace yourself throughout the year. So does your school board have a clearly articulated annual calendar that guides the work and strategic focus of the board? What discussions might you need to have in order to pull together all of the different aspects of the board's work into an annual calendar?